The rain came down over Thornfield Hall in sheets of hammered silver, turning the gravel drive into a river of broken stone. Alexander Ashworth, Duke of Ravenmore, stood at the library window with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the carriage trundle toward the main doors. He did not move. He rarely did, unless movement served a purpose. 4 years at war had taught him the value of stillness. 4 years commanding men in the mud of the peninsula, where chaos was a disease and discipline the only cure. The men had called him the Iron Duke, though he was not yet a duke then. They said he could read a battlefield like scripture and sentence a man to death without raising his voice. They said he had no heart. They were wrong. He had a heart. It was buried deep beneath duty and grief, sealed behind walls he had built with his own hands. He simply refused to let it rule him. The door opened. His steward entered with a bow. "Your Grace, the carriage from Hartwell Manor has arrived." "Show them to the drawing-room. I will attend shortly." The steward hesitated. "There is a matter, Your Grace. The young lady is not alone. Her mother accompanies her and her sister." Alexander turned from the window. The storm outside cast shadows across his face, sharpening the angles of a countenance many found forbidding. His eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to hold winter itself, fixed on the steward with quiet impatience. The invitation was extended to one. "Indeed, Your Grace, yet they have arrived all three and the mother is quite insistent." A muscle tightened in his jaw. He had inherited this estate, this title, and with them a mountain of debts left by his late brother's recklessness. The solution had been presented with cold precision by his solicitors: marry an heiress, the daughter of a wealthy shipping magnate from the north, newly titled, eager to buy respectability with gold. It was a transaction, nothing more. He had agreed to meet the girl. He had not agreed to entertain her entire family. "Very well," he said. "Prepare rooms. Inform Mrs. Hartwell that I will receive them in 1 hour." The drawing-room at Thornfield Hall was a cavern of dark wood and ancestral portraits, each painted face bearing the Ashworth features: gray eyes, strong jaws, a certain severity of expression that suggested perpetual judgment. Candles flickered in iron sconces as the Hartwell family entered, their rich clothing a bright splash against the room's somber elegance. Mrs. Hartwell swept in first, a widow dressed in mauve silk, her smile practiced and predatory. The younger daughter, Cecilia, followed with the nervous energy of a debutante at her first ball, and behind them, like a shadow given form, came the one Alexander had not expected. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her beauty was quieter, the kind that revealed itself slowly: high cheekbones, dark hair pulled back with simple severity, eyes the color of strong tea that missed nothing. She wore gray, a shade that should have made her invisible. Instead, it made her unforgettable. "The eldest daughter," Mrs. Hartwell announced with a dismissive wave. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She accompanies us as companion to her sister." Alexander's gaze met Eleanor's across the room. Something passed between them: recognition, perhaps, or the strange awareness of two people who understood what it meant to be useful rather than wanted. He inclined his head. "Miss Hartwell." "Your Grace." Her voice was low, measured, a melody in the gloom. Mrs. Hartwell launched into pleasantries, her words as calculated as battlefield maneuvers. Cecilia giggled and blushed and batted her lashes. Eleanor stood apart, her hands folded at her waist, her stillness matching his own. She was the one he watched. And when their eyes met again, something in his chest, something he had thought long dead, stirred awake. The storm raged on outside, but inside a different storm was beginning. He could not have her. She was not the heiress. She was the chaperone, the spinster sister, the one expected to fade into the wallpaper while her younger sibling captured the prize. But Alexander Ashworth had never been drawn to the expected. And that was the problem. The first dinner at Thornfield Hall was a study in restraint. Alexander sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his position commanding even in silence. The Hartwell family occupied the chairs nearest him, Mrs. Hartwell to his right, Cecilia to his left, Alina seated further down, a deliberate arrangement that spoke volumes about the family's hierarchy. "You must forgive the informality of our arrival, Your Grace," Mrs. Hartwell said, dabbing at her lips with a linen napkin. "The roads were so treacherous, and I could not bear the thought of sweet Cecilia traveling alone." "Of course." Alexander's voice was flat, betraying nothing. Cecilia leaned forward, her décolletage strategically displayed above the neckline of her rose-colored gown. "Have you always lived at Thornfield, Your Grace? It is the most magnificent house I have ever seen." "I was raised here, yes, though I have spent recent years abroad." "Fighting in the war," Mrs. Hartwell supplied. "We heard all about your heroics. The newspapers called you the king's coldest general." A faint tightening at the corner of his mouth was the only sign of discomfort. "Newspapers exaggerate." "Modesty," Mrs. Hartwell trilled. "How refreshing in a man of your position." Alina said nothing. She ate with quiet precision, her attention fixed on her plate. And yet Alexander sensed she was aware of everything. The slight tremor in Cecilia's hand when she reached for her wine glass, the way Mrs. Hartwell's eyes catalogued the silver candlesticks, the tension that lived beneath his own composed exterior. He found himself speaking. "And what of you, Miss Hartwell? How do you find Thornfield?" Alina looked up, startled. For a moment her composure slipped, revealing something raw beneath the surface, surprise, perhaps, that he had addressed her directly. "It is beautiful, Your Grace, though the storm makes it difficult to see the grounds clearly. Perhaps you might explore them tomorrow, if the weather permits. The gardens are at their finest in early autumn." Cecilia's lip curled, a flash of petulance quickly hidden. "Alina is not much for gardens. She prefers books and quiet corners." "Indeed," Alexander's gaze lingered on Alina. "A woman of intellect, how fortunate." The words were simple, but they landed like stones in still water. Mrs. Hartwell's smile faltered. Cecilia's cheeks flushed with confusion. Alina's eyes widened, a question forming in their depths. "What are you doing?" He did not answer. He was not certain he knew. Later that night, Alina escaped to the library. The house was vast and unfamiliar, but she had always possessed an instinct for finding rooms filled with books. They were her refuge, her sanctuary, the only places where she could breathe. She trailed her fingers along leather spines, reading titles in the dim light of a single candle. The storm had passed, leaving the night wrapped in fog. Silence pressed against the windows like a living thing. "Do you often wander strange houses alone at night, Miss Hartwell?" She spun, heart-lurching. Alexander stood in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the candlelight from the corridor. He had removed his coat. His shirt was open at the throat, revealing a glimpse of skin and the shadow of an old scar. "I apologize, Your Grace. I did not mean to intrude." "You are not intruding." He stepped into the room and the door swung shut behind him with a soft click. "This library has been empty for years. It could use the company." Alina forced herself to breathe evenly. "My sister is asleep, my mother too. I could not find rest myself." "And so you sought out the books." "Books have always been my companions." She paused. "Even when people have not." The words hung between them, more honest than she intended. She expected him to recoil, to remember the distance that should exist between a duke and a poor relation. Instead, he moved closer. "You speak as though solitude is a familiar friend. Is it not for you, Your Grace?" His eyes met hers. In the candlelight they were no longer gray but silver, luminous with something she could not name. "Solitude has been my constant," he said quietly, "but I cannot claim it has been my friend." The admission was small, yet it felt monumental, a crack in the armor of the Iron Duke, offered in the hush of a midnight library. Alina's chest tightened. She understood this man in ways that frightened her. His isolation, his discipline, the weight he carried without complaint. She saw herself reflected in his stillness. "You should return to your room," he said, his voice rougher now. "The house is cold at night." "Your Grace." "Alexander." The name hung in the air, intimate and forbidden. She should not use it. She should curtsy and leave and never speak of this moment again. But she did not move. "Alexander," she repeated, testing the shape of it on her tongue. "Why did you invite my sister here?" The question was direct. She watched him absorb it, saw the brief flash of surprise in his eyes before it disappeared. "You know why. Because you need her fortune." "Yes." "And she needs your title." "Yes." "Then we understand each other." "Perhaps too well, Miss Hartwell." She smiled then, a small, sad expression that transformed her face into something achingly lovely. "Alina." His jaw tightened. The air between them crackled with tension, with the awareness of how close they stood, how easy it would be to close the distance. "You should go," he said, but his voice was strained and he did not step back. "You said I was not intruding." "I said many things." He reached out, almost against his will, and his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, barely there, yet it sent heat cascading through her body. Alina's breath caught. At that moment, the library door burst open. Mrs. Hartwell stood in the entrance, her face a mask of horror and fury. Behind her, the first light of dawn was beginning to stain the sky. "Alina," she hissed, "what is the meaning of this?" And in the silence that followed, Alina realized the terrible truth. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The morning brought consequences. Alexander stood in his study, listening to Mrs. Hartwell's voice rise and fall like the crash of waves against rocks. She had positioned herself before his desk, her face mottled with indignation, her hands gripping a handkerchief as though it were a weapon. "I will not have my daughter's reputation compromised by scandal, Your Grace. Alina's behavior last night was inexcusable. To be found alone with you in the middle of the night, unchaperoned. Nothing improper occurred. Perception matters more than truth in society. You know this as well as I." He did know. He had spent his entire adult life navigating the treacherous waters of aristocratic expectations. A single whispered rumor could destroy a woman's prospects forever. "What would you have me do?" Mrs. Hartwell drew herself up, and Alexander saw the calculation behind her eyes. She had been waiting for this moment, maneuvering toward it since her arrival. "I would have you honor your intentions toward Cecilia. Announce the engagement immediately. The sooner this union is secured, the sooner any hint of scandal will be forgotten. And Miss Hartwell, Alina will return home at once. She has proven herself a liability. I should never have brought her." The words landed with cold finality. Alexander felt something twist in his chest, anger, perhaps, or the hollow ache of inevitability. "She is your daughter." "She is my late husband's daughter by his first marriage," Mrs. Hartwell corrected sharply. "I have raised her, fed her, clothed her, but she has always been difficult, ungrateful. This incident only proves what I have long suspected." Alexander's voice dropped to a dangerous register. "What might that be?" "That she is jealous of her sister and would do anything to sabotage this match." The accusation was absurd. Alexander had seen no jealousy in Alina's eyes, no malice. He had seen only loneliness, intelligence, and a desperate, quiet dignity. But he could not defend her. To do so would only deepen the scandal, confirm Mrs. Hartwell's suspicions, and make Alina's position more precarious. "Very well," he said, the words like ash in his mouth. "Have your solicitor draft the announcement. I will present it to Cecilia this afternoon." Triumph gleamed in Mrs. Hartwell's eyes. "And Alina?" She will remain here until suitable transportation can be arranged. I will not have her cast out onto the roads." The older woman's lips tightened, but she nodded. "As you wish, but she will stay confined to her room until departure. I trust you will respect that boundary." She left without waiting for a response. Alexander stood in the silence, his hands braced against the desk, his head bowed. The engagement was necessary. He had always known it would come to this. Cecilia was the heiress. Alina was the obstacle. So why did the thought of her leaving feel like a sentence of exile? Alina sat by the window of her small chamber, watching the fog roll across the gardens below. The world outside was gray and formless, matching the desolation in her heart. She had been careless. She had allowed herself to feel something, to want something that could never be hers, and now she would pay the price. A knock sounded at the door. Before she could respond, it opened to reveal Cecilia, her pretty face arranged in an expression of practiced concern. "Sister, may I come in?" "You are already in." Cecilia's eyes narrowed, the mask slipping. "I came to warn you. Stay away from the Duke. He is mine. I will not have you ruin this for me." Alina turned back to the window. "I have no intention of interfering. You may have him, Cecilia. Congratulations on your impending engagement." "You sound bitter." "I sound tired." Cecilia crossed the room, her skirts rustling against the floor. She was smaller than Alina, softer, with golden curls and a rosebud mouth. She had been taught from childhood that her beauty was her greatest asset, and she wielded it like a blade. "Mother says you were found with him in the library, alone, at night." She paused, letting the implication hang. "What did you do to him?" "I did nothing." "Liar, you have always wanted what belongs to me." Alina rose, her movements slow and controlled. "I have never wanted what belongs to you, Cecilia, but perhaps you should ask yourself why you are so threatened by the mere possibility." Cecilia's hand shot out, and for a moment Alina thought she might strike her. But the younger woman caught herself, smoothing her expression into something cold. "Leave Thornfield, Alina. Go back to whatever shadow you crawled from. No one wants you here." She swept from the room, leaving Alina alone with the echo of her words. "No one wants you." She had heard those words before in different forms from different voices. Her stepmother, her sister, the society that had labeled her a spinster at 24. She had learned to bear them, to build walls around her heart. But Alexander had made her want to tear those walls down. And that was the cruelest blow of all. The engagement was announced that evening. Alexander stood before the assembled household, servants, family, guests, and spoke the words with mechanical precision. Cecilia beamed at his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Mrs. Hartwell dabbed at her eyes with theatrical emotion. Alina watched from the back of the room, her face pale but composed. She did not look at Alexander. She could not bear it. When the applause subsided and the congratulations began, she slipped away unnoticed. The hallways of Thornfield stretched before her like a labyrinth, each turn leading deeper into shadow. She found herself in the conservatory, a glass-paned room filled with roses and the scent of damp earth. The moon had risen, silvering the petals with frostlight. "What have I done?" The whisper escaped before she could stop it. "You have done nothing." She turned. Alexander stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You should not be here," she said. "The engagement." "To hell with the engagement." The words shocked them both. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his composure cracking like ice on a thawing river. "I cannot stop thinking about you," he said, his voice raw. "From the moment you walked into my house, you have consumed my thoughts. I tried to fight it. I tried to remember my duty. But when I saw you standing there, watching me pledge myself to your sister—" "Stop," Alina's voice shook. "Please, this is difficult enough." He halted, mere inches away. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. "Tell me you feel nothing," he challenged. "Tell me last night meant nothing and I will walk away. I will marry your sister and we will never speak of this again." She opened her mouth to lie. The words formed on her tongue, sharp and necessary. But they would not come. "I cannot tell you that," she whispered. "God help me, I cannot." The confession hung between them, fragile and devastating. Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted in his expression: pain, longing, and a terrible resolve. "Then we are both lost." He stepped back and the distance returned, colder and wider than before. "Your sister is my betrothed. Whatever this is between us, it ends now." Elena nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I know. Tomorrow you leave for your mother's estate. I will not write to you. I will not seek you out." "I know. Elena." "Your Grace." The title was a shield, a reminder of the gulf between them. "You have made your choice. Let us both live with it." She curtsied, turned, and walked away. And the Duke of Ravenmore watched her go, knowing that he had just broken both their hearts with his own hands. Elena departed Thornfield Hall at dawn. The carriage was simple, unadorned, a stark contrast to the gilded vehicle that had brought them. Mrs. Hartwell had arranged for an old servant to drive her, an ancient man with rheumy eyes and a tendency to mumble. Elena did not complain. She climbed into the worn leather seat and stared straight ahead as the great house receded into the mist. She did not look back. In the weeks that followed, Elena returned to the suffocating familiarity of Hartwell Manor, a house that had never felt like home. Her days blurred into monotonous routine, needlework she did not care for, visits from neighbors she could not abide, meals eaten in silence while her stepmother's absence left the rooms echoing and empty. The engagement had been announced in the papers. She had read the notice with dry eyes and a heart that refused to feel anything at all. "His Grace the Duke of Ravenmore is pleased to announce his betrothal to Miss Cecilia Hartwell of Hartwell Manor, Northumberland." Simple words, they might as well have been a death sentence. Elena buried herself in books, in long walks across the moors, in any activity that kept her from thinking. But at night, when the house was still and the wind moaned through the eaves, she remembered. The library, the conservatory, the brush of his fingers against her cheek. "Tell me you feel nothing." She had never been able to lie to him. 3 weeks after her return, a letter arrived. Elena recognized the seal before she broke it, the Ashworth crest pressed into dark red wax. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. "Elena, I know I said I would not write. I know this letter violates every promise I made, but I cannot remain silent. The engagement proceeds, the preparations consume every waking hour, and yet I find myself searching for your face in every room. I find myself listening for your voice in every conversation. I have made a terrible mistake. Tell me to stop and I will. Tell me there is no hope and I will release you from this torment. But if there is even the smallest part of you that feels as I do, I beg you to tell me before it is too late. Alexander." Elena read the letter 3 times. Then she held it to the flame of her candle and watched it burn. She could not respond. To do so would be to betray her sister, her family, everything she had been raised to value. She had already come too close to destruction once. But the words burned themselves into her memory, and she knew she would carry them forever. A second letter came a week later. "I understand your silence. Perhaps it is the answer I deserve, but I cannot marry her, Elena. I cannot stand before God and pledge my life to a woman I do not love while the woman I do love slips further from my reach. I am coming to Hartwell Manor. I will speak to your stepmother, dissolve the engagement, and declare my feelings openly. Whatever the cost, I will bear it. Wait for me. Alexander." Elena's blood ran cold. This was madness. The scandal would be catastrophic. The Hartwell family would be ruined, Cecilia's prospects destroyed, and Alexander's honor shattered beyond repair. The Duke of Ravenmore could not simply cast aside one sister for another. Society would never forgive him. The king himself might intervene. She had to stop him. That night, Elinor packed a small bag, left a note for the housekeeper, and slipped away under cover of darkness. She took the old horse from the stable, a gentle mare long past her prime, and rode toward the main road. She had no clear plan. She knew only that she must intercept Alexander before he reached the manor, must convince him to turn back. The night was cold, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, soaking through her cloak until she shivered with every step. She rode for hours, the road winding through dark woods and empty fields. Twice she nearly turned back. Twice she pressed on. And then, as dawn began to paint the horizon, she saw him. A lone rider on a black horse, his greatcoat billowing in the wind. He rode with the bearing of a soldier, purposeful and unyielding. Elinor urged her mare forward, her voice hoarse. "Alexander." He reined in sharply, his horse rearing as he caught sight of her. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the world was hushed and gray. "Elinor," he dismounted in a single fluid motion, closing the distance between them. "What are you doing here? You are soaked through." "You cannot do this." Her words tumbled out, frantic and desperate. "You cannot break the engagement. The scandal would destroy us all." "Let it." His hands found her shoulders, steadying her. "Elinor, I will not live a lie. I have spent my life serving duty and honor, but you taught me that there are things worth more than reputation." "Cecilia." "Cecilia does not love me. She loves the title, the position, the wealth. We both know it." Elinor shook her head, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "This is not just about her. It is about your legacy, your responsibilities." "My responsibility is to the truth." His voice dropped, fierce and tender. "And the truth is that I love you. I have loved you since the moment you walked into my house with storm clouds in your eyes and refused to be invisible." The words struck her like a physical blow. She swayed, and he caught her, pulling her against his chest. "I love you," he repeated, his lips brushing against her hair. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving it if you will let me." Elinor closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her cheek. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to protect, it all seemed distant now, insignificant compared to the warmth of his embrace. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I have loved you from the first." He tilted her chin, meeting her gaze. The rain fell around them like a blessing, washing away the pretense, the fear, the careful walls they had both constructed. "Then we face this together," he said, "whatever comes." And as his lips found hers, Elinor realized that she had finally found the one thing she had never dared to hope for. A place to belong. The scene at Hartwell Manor was nothing short of calamitous. Mrs. Hartwell stood in the drawing room, her face a mask of fury so intense that the servants had fled to the kitchens. Cecilia wept dramatically on the chaise lounge, her cries punctuated by accusations and threats. Elinor stood near the window, her back straight, her hands folded before her, while Alexander remained at her side like a sentinel. "You dare!" Mrs. Hartwell's voice rose to a shriek. "You dare come into my house and tell me you wish to exchange one daughter for another like a horse at market." "I am not exchanging anyone." Alexander's tone was calm but unyielding. "I am ending an engagement that should never have been made and declaring my intention to marry the woman I love." "Love?" Cecilia's head snapped up, tears streaking her carefully powdered cheeks. "What love? You barely know her. She is nothing, a spinster, a companion, a woman with no fortune and no prospects. How can you choose her over me?" "Cecilia, please," Elinor began. "Stay out of this," Cecilia's voice cracked. "This is your fault. You seduced him. You threw yourself at him because you could not bear to see me happy. That is enough. Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. I will not permit anyone to speak of Miss Hartwell in that manner. Eleanor has done nothing wrong. The fault, if fault there is, lies with me. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. The fault is hers. She was sent to Thornfield as a companion, and she used the opportunity to ensnare a man above her station. She is a schemer, just like her mother before her. Eleanor flinched. The mention of her mother, a woman she barely remembered, a woman whose memory was treated as shameful, struck deeper than any other accusation. Alexander noticed. His jaw tightened and he stepped forward, his presence suddenly formidable. Mrs. Hartwell, I have tried to conduct this matter with civility. But if you continue to insult the woman I intend to make my wife, I will be forced to remind you of certain facts you would prefer remain private. The room went cold. Mrs. Hartwell's face paled. What do you mean? I mean that I made inquiries before coming here. I know the truth about your late husband's will. I know the conditions attached to Cecilia's inheritance, and I know that without this marriage, you will lose everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor stared at Alexander, shock rendering her speechless. She had known her stepmother was eager for the match, but this was something else entirely. What is he saying? Cecilia's voice was small, confused. Mama, what does he mean? Mrs. Hartwell's composure crumbled. Her face aged 10 years in an instant, the careful artifice stripped away to reveal raw desperation. The debts, she whispered, the creditors, we are ruined. Cecilia gasped. Ruined, but the estate, the money. Gone. Alexander's voice was not cruel, but it was honest. Your father's fortune was built on speculation and borrowed capital. When he died, the debts became due. Your mother has been concealing the truth for years, hoping a wealthy marriage would solve everything. Eleanor's heart ached for her sister, for the girl who had been raised to believe she was an heiress when she was in fact a pawn in a desperate game. Why did you not tell me? Cecilia's voice trembled. Why did you let me believe? Because I was ashamed. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes glistened with tears. I did not want you to know how close we are to losing everything. When the Duke expressed interest, I thought we were saved. Alexander's expression softened, though only slightly. I understand your desperation, but I cannot marry Cecilia. It would be a deception that would harm us all. Then we are truly ruined. Mrs. Hartwell sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Eleanor moved then, crossing the room to kneel before her stepmother. Despite years of coldness, of dismissal, of being made to feel unwanted, she could not bear to see the woman broken. We will find a way, she said quietly. We are family, we will face this together. Mrs. Hartwell lowered her hands, revealing red-rimmed eyes. You would help me, after everything. Eleanor hesitated. The wounds ran deep, and forgiveness would not come easily. But she had learned something important in recent months. Bitterness was its own kind of prison. I will try, she said. The days that followed were tense but productive. Alexander summoned his solicitors, who examined the Hartwell finances with grim precision. The situation was dire but not hopeless. With careful management, selective sales of property, and the settling of certain debts, the family could survive with modest means. Cecilia, stripped of her illusions, retreated into wounded silence. She spent long hours alone in her room, refusing meals and company. Eleanor attempted to reach her, but every overture was met with hostility. The news of the broken engagement spread through society like wildfire. The scandal was everything Eleanor had feared. Whispers at every gathering, cold glances, invitations rescinded. Alexander bore the brunt of it with stoic dignity, refusing to apologize for following his heart. But the consequences were real. His political influence waned. Old allies distanced themselves. A man who had once commanded armies now found himself shut out of the very circles he had served. One evening, Elinor found him in the garden, staring at the night sky. "You are troubled," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I am thinking of all I have cost you." "You have cost me nothing. You have given me everything." He turned to face her, and she saw the doubt in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. "I should have found another way. I should have protected you from the scandal." Elinor took his hand, feeling the calluses earned in battle. "I did not fall in love with a man who takes the easy path. I fell in love with a man who fights for what he believes in. I have lost allies, influence, the respect of men I once called friends. Their respect was conditional. My love is not." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You deserve better than this." "I deserve exactly this," she whispered. "A man who would risk everything for love. That is more than I ever dreamed of." They stood together in the darkness, the weight of the world pressing against them, and yet somehow they found in each other the strength to bear it. The wedding would be small, the path ahead would be hard, but they would walk it together. And that was enough. The letter arrived on a gray October morning, bearing the royal seal. Alexander read it in silence, his expression unreadable, while Elinor watched with growing unease. They had been staying at a small hunting lodge on the edge of his estate, a temporary retreat while Thornfield Hall was prepared for their life together. The scandal had followed them even here, but within these walls they had found a measure of peace. Now that peace was threatened. "What is it?" Elinor asked. "The king summons me to Windsor. He wishes to discuss the matter of the broken engagement personally." Elinor's blood chilled. "The king himself, Alexander, this is serious." "I am aware." He folded the letter with precise movements. "It seems my enemies have been busy whispering in royal ears. They will portray me as a man of dishonor, unfit to hold his title. But that is absurd. You serve the crown faithfully." Serving the crown and defying society's expectations are two different things. The king cannot afford to appear lenient toward a duke who breaks sacred vows, even if those vows were never formalized. Elinor moved to his side, her hand resting on his arm. "What will you do?" "What I have always done, face it head on." The journey to Windsor took 3 days. Elinor insisted on accompanying him, despite his protests that she should remain behind. "Whatever happens, I will not hide," she said. "I am to be your wife. Your battles are mine." They arrived at the castle with little ceremony. The halls were cold and imposing, filled with courtiers who studied them with barely concealed curiosity. Alexander walked with his head high, his bearing that of a man who had faced far greater threats than whispered gossip. But Elinor saw the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. He was afraid, not for himself but for her. The audience chamber was vast, its walls hung with portraits of kings past. The current monarch sat upon a gilded throne, his expression inscrutable. He was younger than Elinor had expected, with sharp eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently set in judgment. "Your Grace," the king's voice echoed through the room, "approach." Alexander stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty." "I have heard troubling reports. It is said you abandoned your betrothed, the daughter of a respectable family, in favor of her elder sister, that you have brought scandal upon your name and shame upon the nobility. The reports are not inaccurate, Your Majesty, though they lack context." "Then provide the context." Alexander straightened, meeting the king's gaze directly. "I ended an engagement that was based on financial necessity rather than affection. I then declared my love for the woman who holds my heart. If that is a crime, I plead guilty." A murmur rippled through the assembled courtiers. The king raised a hand, silencing them. "And the woman in question, is she present?" Elinor stepped forward, her legs trembling but her voice steady. "I am here, Your Majesty." The king studied her with unnerving intensity. "You must be very confident in your hold over the duke to appear before me so brazenly." "I am confident in his honor, your majesty, and in the sincerity of our feelings for one another." Sincerity. The king's lips curved, though the expression was not kind. "A convenient word. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, do you love this man enough to see him stripped of his title, his lands, his standing?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Eleanor's heart pounded. She understood the test. The king was offering her a way out, a chance to save Alexander by sacrificing herself. If she said no, the engagement would be dissolved and Alexander would be forgiven. If she said yes, they would both face the consequences. She lifted her chin, meeting the king's gaze without flinching. "I love him enough to stand by his side, whatever the cost, but I also love him enough to walk away if my presence would bring him ruin." Alexander turned sharply. "Eleanor." "Let her finish," the king commanded. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "Your Majesty, I am not a woman of fortune or status. I have nothing to offer the Duke except my heart and my loyalty. If those are not enough, if my love would destroy the man I cherish, then I will release him, not because I wish to, but because his happiness matters more than my own." The silence that followed was profound. Alexander moved to her side, taking her hand in full view of the court. "And I would refuse such release. Your Majesty, I have served this nation with every breath in my body. I have led men into battle, borne the weight of command, sacrificed my youth and my health for the crown. If I ask for one thing in return, the right to marry the woman I love, is that so unforgivable?" The king regarded them both for a long moment. Then slowly he rose from the throne. "The Duke of Ravenmore has indeed served faithfully," he said. "And while his actions have caused distress to the Hartwell family, I am informed that the elder Miss Hartwell has made peace with the younger, and that arrangements have been made for the family's financial stability." Eleanor blinked. She had written to Cecilia before leaving, extending an olive branch. She had not expected a response so soon, or one so favorable. "Furthermore," the king continued, "I am not unsympathetic to matters of the heart. I have seen too many marriages built on ambition crumble into bitterness." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "If the Duke is willing to accept the consequences of his choice, and if Miss Hartwell is willing to face society's censure, then I see no reason to withhold my blessing." The court erupted in whispers. Alexander's hand tightened around Eleanor's. "Your Majesty." "I am not finished." The king raised a hand. "The engagement may proceed, but I expect the Duke to prove his continued worth to the crown. There is an estate in Scotland that requires a firm hand. I am appointing you as royal administrator. It will remove you from London society for a time, allowing the gossip to fade. Do you accept?" Alexander bowed, relief evident in every line of his body. "With gratitude, Your Majesty." "Then go, marry your bride. Prove to the world that love and duty are not incompatible." They left Windsor in a daze. The weight of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders. That night in the privacy of their lodgings, Eleanor finally wept, not with sorrow but with overwhelming relief. Alexander held her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "We are free," he murmured. "We are finally free." And for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that happiness might truly be within reach. The wedding took place in the chapel at Thornfield Hall on the first day of December. Snow fell gently outside, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. Inside, the chapel was warm with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of evergreens and roses. The guest list was small, a deliberate choice born of scandal and necessity, but those who attended were true friends, people who had stood by them through the storm. Eleanor walked down the aisle alone, her hand resting on the arm of a neighbor who had offered to stand in place of her father. Her gown was simple, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. She wore no jewels except a single pearl pendant that had belonged to her mother. At the altar stood Alexander, tall and resplendent in his dark blue coat and silver waistcoat. His eyes found hers as she approached, and in them she saw everything she had ever needed: love, devotion, and the promise of forever. The ceremony was brief but profound. They exchanged vows in voices that trembled with emotion, the words binding them together in ways that transcended legal formality. When Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple band of gold etched with the Ashworth crest, Alina felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. "And I you," he replied, "until the stars burn out." The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Toasts were raised, laughter echoed through the ancient halls, and for a few precious hours the weight of the past months lifted entirely. Cecilia attended the wedding, her expression guarded but no longer hostile. She approached Alina during the reception, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I came to wish you well," she said stiffly, "and to apologize for the things I said." Alina studied her sister for a long moment. She saw the pain beneath the surface, the confusion of a young woman forced to confront harsh truths. But she also saw the beginning of something else, a quiet strength, perhaps, or the first stirrings of maturity. "Thank you, Cecilia. I know this has not been easy for you." Cecilia laughed bitterly. "Easy? I was supposed to be the one getting married. I was supposed to be the Duchess. Instead, I am left with nothing." "You are not left with nothing. You have your youth, your health, and a family that loves you, even if we are all learning to love each other better." Cecilia's composure cracked. "I do not know who I am without the title, the prospects, the future I was promised." "Then perhaps this is an opportunity to find out." Alina reached for her sister's hand. "You are stronger than you know, Cecilia. I have always believed that." For a moment, Cecilia hesitated. Then she squeezed Alina's fingers briefly before pulling away. "Perhaps you are right. I need time." "Take all the time you need." They parted with a fragile truce, the first step on a long road toward healing. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander led Alina to the conservatory, the place where they had first confessed their feelings. The roses were gone now, replaced by winter jasmine and forced blooms that filled the glass room with delicate fragrance. "Are you happy?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. Alina considered the question. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, the pain, the scandal, the moments of despair when she believed they would never be together. She thought of the challenges that still lay ahead, the whispers that would follow them, the isolation of their new life in Scotland. And she thought of Alexander, his steady presence, his fierce love, the way he made her feel seen and valued in a world that had tried to render her invisible. "I am not just happy," she said. "I am at peace. There is a difference." He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his features. "I have never known peace before you. And now? Now I know it is not a place or a circumstance. It is a person. It is you." She rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with an urgency born of months of longing. His hands tangled in her hair, and she melted against him, feeling the beat of his heart against her chest. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered against his lips. "A love like this was not meant for someone like me." "You were not meant for a love like this," he corrected. "You were meant for more, for a love that sees your worth, that honors your strength, that would move mountains to be with you." "And now we have it." "Now we have it," he echoed, "and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never doubt it." They stood together in the conservatory, wrapped in each other's arms, while the snow continued to fall outside. The world beyond might judge them, might whisper their names with cruel tongues. But within this moment, within this embrace, there was only them. The Duke had found his Duchess. The King's coldest general had found his warmth. And Alina, who had spent her life believing she was unworthy of love, had finally found a home. She looked up at her husband, at the man who had broken every rule for her, who had faced kings and scandal and the censure of society, and felt a swell of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. "I love you, Alexander Ashworth," she said, "with all that I am and all that I will ever be." His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Alina," he replied. "Now and always, through every storm, every trial, every joy, you are mine and I am yours." The words settled over them like a benediction. In the months that followed, they journeyed to Scotland, taking up residence at the estate the king had assigned. It was a wild, beautiful place, far from the drawing rooms of London, and there they built a life together. Alexander proved to be a capable administrator, earning the respect of the local clans. Alina discovered talents she had never known, managing the household, advocating for tenants, creating a home that became known for its warmth and hospitality. News reached them occasionally of the world they had left behind. Cecilia, to everyone's surprise, had traveled to Italy with a widowed aunt, determined to see the world before settling into whatever future awaited her. Mrs. Hartwell had moved to a smaller house in Bath, where she lived quietly and without pretension. The scandal faded, as scandals do, replaced by newer gossip and fresher dramas. And in time, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenmore were remembered not for the controversy of their courtship, but for the strength of their devotion. Children came, first a son, dark-haired and serious like his father. Then a daughter with Alina's warm eyes and Alexander's stubborn chin. The halls of their Scottish estate rang with laughter, a sound that had once seemed impossible in any Ashworth household. One evening, years later, Alexander found Alina in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She leaned back against him, savoring the familiar comfort of his embrace. "I was thinking about the night we first met, the storm, the library, the way you looked at me as if you could see into my soul." "I could," he said simply. "I saw everything. Your strength, your sadness, your fierce determination to survive. I knew then that you would change my life." "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of wanting something I could not have, afraid of the consequences." "And now?" She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. The years had added lines to his face, threads of silver to his dark hair, but his eyes remained the same, gray as winter, warm as home. "Now I am not afraid, not of anything." He kissed her, slow and tender, and she felt the familiar flutter in her chest that had never faded. "I love you," he said, "now and always." "Now and always," she echoed. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They stood together, Duke and Duchess, lovers and partners, bound by a love that had defied every obstacle. And in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the beauty of their shared life, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found what so many spend lifetimes searching for. A love that was worth everything,